Hello, my name is Arcadia English. I am one of the Synapse Triumvirate, along with Bo Mello Robinson and Fraser Andrews. And I'm just going to talk you through the major game mechanics which were implemented for the game we created for the interaction design module, the Generals of Galaxaron. The first view I have for you here shows the game state as it might be during a typical game. So in the middle of the board there is a grid, and it's got some cards representing monsters on it. Each end it's got the player's nexus. It's also got some terrain on it. The interface has four main elements. On the right, at the top and on the bottom in green are the player's life totals. These start at 20 and get reduced over the course of the game. As soon as one life total hits 0, that player loses. In between that is a message box, which just contains all the messages sent to the player, basically telling them what's been happening in the game recently. On the left, at the top, is a modal control system, because there's several different game modes, and the controls, while thematically linked, don't necessarily do exactly the same thing at any given time. The controls are given up there. On the middle is the information box, which gives as much pertinent information about the currently selected square on the grid view, or when you're in the hand, it will give you an overview of the cards in the hand. At each end is the player nexus. This is the most important part of the game for any player, because this is where they summon their monsters from. I'll talk a bit about that later. It is also represents their life total in many ways, in that any time the nexus gets damaged, the player's life total goes down, and for the player to win, they typically have to attack the other player's nexus. Cards can be played from in hand simply by selecting the card and pressing enter, at which point the rules on the card are executed immediately, and they may play another card, or they may end their go, or they might want to go onto the grid and move their monsters around. But as many cards as you have available can be played in one turn, with one or two exceptions, which I'll come on to. Monster cards are played the same way. Like normal cards, they have the same information. They have some rules on them, although they don't have to. They also have in the bottom right-hand corner of the card, they have two numbers. The number on the left-hand side of the slash represents their attack power, which is how much damage they do in combat, and the number on the right-hand side of the slash represents their defensive power, which is how much damage they can take in combat. The other feature which you'll notice all the cards have is they are coloured according to what faction they're from, and this is to make it easier to distinguish what card's what. Some cards can only be played when certain conditions are met. For example, it might require a certain number of a particular terrain to be on the table. It might require you to have a certain number of cards in your hand. It might require you to do all sorts of things. And when this condition isn't met, the game prevents you from playing those cards. Another example of this is the resource cards, which are in this demo we've made are the Scrapyard and the Parasitic Mists. Resource cards are designed specifically to affect the terrain on the grid, and only one may be played per turn to keep the player's resources at a manageable level. What does terrain do then? Terrain, while having no specific influence, most cards will be influenced by terrain in some way. Especially the more powerful cards will require certain conditions to be available in the terrain. So managing your terrain correctly is essential to play the show-stopping cards near the end of the game. Another feature of terrain is that the terrain will gradually spread out over the course of the game as it influences the 8 squares surrounding it, and increases that influence every turn. Once that influence reaches maximum level, it takes those squares become that terrain, leading to another tactic, another dimension of tactical play for the players to try and take advantage on. When monsters are on the grid, they can be moved in any one of 4 directions. They may only move 1 square per turn. If they find themselves trying to move into a square occupied by one of the other player's monsters, combat ensues. The combat is worked out reasonably simply. Each monster will do an amount of damage between half its attack power rounded down and its full attack power. So a monster with 1 attack power might do either 0 or 1 damage. A monster with 2 attack power might do 1 or 2 damage. 3 attack power might do 1, 2 or 3 damage. 4 attack power might do 2, 3 or 4, and so on. And the defending monster also does damage to the attacking player according to the same rules. If at any point any monster has more damage than it does defensive power, the monster dies. Some monsters also have ranged attacks. These ranged attacks do not allow for the defending monster to attack back, and of course they have a certain range, so the range is 1, 2, 3 or 4. The range is defined as however many squares the monster would have to move to reach the opponent. So a monster with range attack 2 could reach a small circle around itself. When a monster attacks a nexus, it also goes into combat, but it always does damage equal to its full attack power. Monsters also have several abilities which may trigger under various situations. These triggers are death effects, which get triggered when that monster dies. So there is an example here where a monster will cause a parasitic mist to appear in its place when it dies. Some effects may also be delayed. Delayed effects happen either at the start of the next player's turn or at the start of your next turn. In this case, with the parasitic mist, at the start of your next turn, the parasitic mist will go away again. It's just a temporary thing. And that's an example of being able to delay effects. Some creatures also have a goes to graveyard effect, which gets triggered whenever something else dies. So whenever a creature dies, the game will check to see if there are any of these effects in place, and it will execute them. There are also triggered abilities, which the player has to actively choose to trigger. All these abilities get executed as soon as they are selected or triggered. The final ability that monsters can have is a comes into play ability, which gets triggered when the monster gets placed on the battlefield from the hand. The final bits of information I want to talk about are buffs. There are creature buffs, which will increase a monster's attack or defense temporarily, or normally temporarily. You can do it permanently as well. And there are also buffs which affect individual squares and will increase the attack or defense, or decrease actually, attacks or defense of creatures in those squares. Finally, state-based effects. These are checked very regularly after every action is carried out. State-based effects check to see whether a player has lost the game, whether a monster has more damage than health, and whether a monster's defense rating is 0 or less. And it will cause things which are supposed to happen in those situations. So one player loses the game, or the other one wins it, or the creature dies. And it will constantly put those into effect. So that's the overview of Generals of Galaxaron, and I hope you get some fun playing it.